again, I must point out, we named a podcast after ourselves. Just
well, that's because podcasting, you have to do this, right?
All you're doing. Trust us. The mores, or you can pick. You don't have to trust both sides, but you got to pick one or the other. Greetings, friends. How's it going?
Hello.
Well,
hey, this everyone. Week Sam's in a laundry room, so that's exciting.
Let it be known that podcasting is a makeshift endeavor. And when your kids are off from school for the week, you hit the road. And yes, 3 or 4 of these participants may be within 10 feet of each other with Sam in the laundry room, but we'll make it work.
I read some technology book by some executive about men doing laundry, so I wanted to represent.
Yeah, doesn't that turn you on, Jess? Sam in a laundry room. God. It's like what I would make on AI porn sites.
I can unzip my ski onesie.
Oh my goodness. This is not how this episode was supposed to start. But alas, it is how it has begun. So welcome back, everyone, to another week of More or Less. Our listenership and viewership is growing, which means it is incumbent upon me to actually introduce ourselves, because I'm getting a lot of feedback that people don't know who we are, but yet they find this podcast. Imagine that. But very happy to be here holding down half of the lesson side. I'm Jessica Lesson, the founder of The Information. Here with Sam is in the laundry room lesson, investor, entrepreneur, and general rabble-rouser. Is that a good description, Sam?
Yeah, I'm a washerwoman.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I think this is going to be a bit. Also, here we have Dave and Britt Morin, the co-founders of Offline Ventures, a very innovative venture capital firm. Incubator, what else? Incubator, investor extraordinaire.
Yeah, thank you. We're all investors and entrepreneurs. Is the moral of the story.
Did you say that I work at Slow Ventures in the intro? Because if not, Kevin Collins is going to be really mad.
Oh, yeah.
Sam works at Slow Ventures.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry. The firm.
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
She didn't call it innovative, though. Now you need a descriptor for Slow Ventures.
Very boring, not innovative.
Yeah. No, you guys are all innovative investors.
I think Slow's very innovative. Yeah.
Also, incredibly innovative entrepreneurs.
You branded as offline, but are online. It's like we're innovative, but we say we're not.
Yeah, exactly.
We both have very controversial names of our venture firms for the tech industry.
Offline and slow. It's like you guys are trying to send a message.
Yeah.
But
may or may not have been involved.
I would be remiss not to also mention the collective entrepreneurial experience of this crew. So having all founded companies, which makes us experts. Let's just admit it, right?
In everything.
Experts on all things.
Good enough to call the shots from the sidelines.
See, Dave is humble. The rest of us are not. So that's how it works. Guys, it has been another interesting week here in Silicon Valley. I think it's been an interesting start to the year, I got to say. We continued to ride the AI wave, whether you believe that is a hype wave or a real wave. I don't know. I think that question is actually getting a little more confusing. So maybe we can dig into that a little bit this week. We've also got, in some of the big headlines so far, maybe the IPO engine is slowly revving up. Maybe Sam's shaking his head. It seems at least like Reddit is getting into gear, as we've reported in The Information and others elsewhere. Question, when was the last time you guys all used Reddit?
Oh,
like daily,
like yesterday.
Weekly?
I'm a daily Reddit user. I love Reddit.
Okay. Yeah. Dave, what do you use Reddit for?
There's really nowhere else on the internet that has all of your most narrow interests, particularly if you like hacking or building on
of porn.
if you're Sam. But say if you're into audio engineering or a variety of different electronics, like there's a lot of narrow communities that you can't find anywhere else.
Got it. So it's daily for you. Brett,
Yep.
how frequent? What's your frequency of
I'm
Reddit?
like a twice a week Reddit user.
Mhm.
I actually referred Reddit out to a friend of ours here the other day who came over for dinner. She's a little bit older. She was having like postmenopausal symptoms, all these weird things going on, but none of the doctors can like tell her if it is related to menopause or not. And I was like, you should probably find a Reddit community for postmenopausal women and see if they've had any solutions to these types of problems. Cause she's like, I don't know if I should take supplements. And I actually find that for very narrow topics like Dave was talking about, where you want to feel like you're not alone and maybe talk to other people that have gone through the same thing, Reddit is a really great forum for that.
Got it. Sam, are you a regular Reddit user?
I don't know how to answer that. It's all porn.
Especially answering it to your wife. This is getting a little awkward for us over here.
That's the thing. Like, look, Reddit does have narrow communities. It also is just full of porn. And again, I'm not against that. I think the internet is for porn. But it is an interesting, crazy world. If you want to see the craziness of the universe, Reddit is certainly the place to go for it. Far more than Twitter, because it's far more than almost any other platform. Now, how that monetizes and how good a business that is always TBD, but it's certainly entertaining.
Well, I think that's the question then. So have any of you ever advertised on Reddit for any business that you've been associated with or a part of?
I have not, but they have a really big advertising. I mean, it's like the primary business, correct? That's what they're going public with. I forgot what their numbers are. Do you have them?
Let me look them up. I think
They also sell
we
crypto.
have reported them at some point, but
Look, I think that the reality is Reddit is actually an interesting advertising market, largely because it is a lot of people and it's super under monetized.
Yeah.
The problem is that the tools are very rudimentary compared to any other modern ad platform you'd be used to. That could be upside, right? If they could get their act together and figure it out. It's also very difficult, I think, because it is unlike, it's the opposite of TikTok, where you can kind of interstitial anything anywhere. Because it's so narrowly focused, I think it is harder to like actually get people in flow to like do things. Now, the thing that does work is if you find super niche communities that are relevant to what you do, it makes sense. So for instance, I've always thought the information should invest way more in distributing content through in sub communities through Reddit. I feel like it's great brand building, and I feel like there probably could be an ad play that works there. But unlike the other platforms, it's just not designed for scale, and it isn't mature from an ad platform perspective. So I've messed around with it, but it hasn't really ever been like a consistent driver of anything I've seen.
I think the other thing about Reddit is that it is one of the better places to learn. Like I was saying, I got really into electronics and in particular doing like large scale electric engineering. And there are places, there are some, I guess YouTube and Reddit in combination are actually one of the best ways to learn some of these niche skills that you can't find anywhere else. And Sam's right, like the advertising market is deeply under monetized. And I think that's the big question for the IPO here is whether or not they're going to be able to build this into a really large scale advertising market or not.
And my sense is honestly that the fact that Twitter hasn't been able to means the answer is probably no, right? In terms of like, my over under on it. Doesn't mean it's not a good product, doesn't mean it's not useful for the world. It certainly feeds a lot of LLMs, right? With just human content. But I do think it's a tough. If TikTok is an example of something that a format that is clearly highly tuned for ads, right, and should monetize extremely well, I would argue that like Reddit is the opposite of that.
Yeah, it seems because it's text based and not, like you said earlier, it's very hard to get people into flow where you can actually get their niche interest and show them the right ad, given all the text-based format. The other thing that is interesting this week is I believe that some news broke that they are licensing their data to OpenAI for $60 million a year. Is that right?
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah. It was actually less than I thought it would be worth.
yeah, I worry about all these licensing deals, I got to say. I think it is impossible to put a price on it. And I will say all the publishers I know that have done licensing deals with LLMs are just scared shitless about them and feel like they did them because, they kind of had no choice.
They needed the
or
revenue. It's like
They needed
BuzzFeed.
the revenue.
BuzzFeed this week
Yeah.
actually sold off Complex for $100 million and is laying off 20% of the company because they need the cash. And it's like all these media companies need the cash, but they're selling their soul because I think OpenAI will take advantage of this in just like a 2 or 3 years time. And you can't.
I didn't even realize BuzzFeed owned Complex.
Not anymore.
I love the idea of someone buying BuzzFeed's data for like an LLM that would be like the most useless LLM in history. Like every response would be like 10 reasons why you should
Maybe it would be a mystical LLM.
You are more like which Roy from Succession.
How do I clean my drain? And it's like, you're most like Kendall.
Maybe, but maybe you could take on the Outbrain media network with it.
Well, I do think, Dave, to your point about licensing LLMs and what Des is saying, I mean, again, if you think that Reddit's future is this great community for learning things, then selling off all of the content for $60 million is a pretty poor trade. It's basically It's basically the Stack Overflow trade, right? Which is, as far as I know, Stack Overflow is still one of the only web properties that has actually been directly impacted by LLMs so far, because it is just like all the same stuff, but better, right? And so it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
So one thing here, I just pulled up the Information's IPO tracker, which I highly recommend because it has a lot of actual facts and data about companies on the precipice of going public. Sometimes this precipice is years, but it looks like, so Reddit had more than 800 million in revenue last year, up 20%. It was not profitable.
Is that all revenue or just ad revenue?
All revenue.
All revenue.
And so I guess it's getting 60 million, if that,
From OpenAI this year.
From OpenAI. And highest private valuation was 10 billion, estimated now based on secondary market data from our partners at Caplight. I should give them a plug, at about 5.6 billion. So
would you rather own Reddit for 5 billion or Twitter for 44 billion?
Definitely Reddit for 5, no question.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely no question. I would actually invest in this IPO. Like, it's a slam dunk.
So Dave, what's the bullish business case? You think advertising can scale for Reddit?
Absolutely. I think it's dramatically undermonetized. I mean, I also think that if anything, YouTube proves that the niche interests are incredibly powerful when done right, and TikTok, et cetera. And that Reddit largely, it's almost similar to Twitter when Elon took over, that there's a lot of areas that Reddit could have gone into, video being the number one example, that they just haven't gone into for, I think, largely dogmatic reasons, and probably could do a lot of damage there and create a much larger advertising market, but they just haven't done it. So to me, there's a combination of new features and a much better advertising market that they have the opportunity to build. And 5 billion seems like pretty low to me.
Well, as we've learned from AI, you don't need to deliver, you just need to sell the dream. So,
okay, we're going to get into that.
I'm actually quite shocked that Reddit doesn't just auto tag every link for every product that people drop in with an affiliate tag.
The
affiliate business could be massive. No, they don't. I was just reading that they really don't. It's a speculative revenue stream. Like I'm in all these, I was pregnant with my last child. I was in all these mom Reddits, and moms like are dropping products all the time. Right. And it's just like, if all of those were tagged, I was like, oh, I got to get that stroller. I got to get that bottle. It's just like, I would be giving Reddit a lot of indirect revenue.
Look, I think the question though, seriously about this is like, what percentage of Reddit isn't porn? Because you guys, it's not zero. Like, I agree that there are lots of like niche communities in Reddit, but like it is also a lot of porn, right? And so I think the big question for the IPO and for a lot of these questions will be like, when you back out the monetizable part of Reddit and then you discount it based on the fact that like a lot of these communities are hard to monetize. Some of them might be easier than others, and there are products you can build, but like, how do you actually like value the overall platform? And that's the thing I think would require actually spending some effort on, to think about how to actually think about it, because we all know it's big, right? But actually how monetizably big it is unclear to me.
And wasn't there
seems to be the perennial question.
And they've had this big tension with in moderating it, right? And then in the past like several months, there was a kerfuffle where some of these community moderators thought the company was going too far in some of their moderation policies. I'm trying to remember the
That's
specifics,
been
but
kind of, since the dawn of Reddit, right? That's been the big challenge. That's sort of the thing that, as we're analyzing it here, I don't want to trivialize. Like the content moderation challenge of Reddit has been one of the most immense on the internet since day one, because their model has largely been freedom. They depend on community moderators to moderate the forum. So there's actually quite a lot of, frankly, free labor that goes into moderating these forums. And I think that's what, Jess, you're referring to. I want to say it was about 6 months ago. There was actually several of these that they decided to take down and take action on, and there were
Well,
lots of
there's a multi-decade history with Reddit of them kind of struggling with this, right, and having different policies at different times. And it's interesting. Like I think when you think about where the hateful or crazy content of the internet is, right? Like the reality is like there's all this stuff in private channels that's actually probably the worst stuff. But if you can't
yeah,
see it, so since you can't see it, people don't worry about it as much, even though they probably should, right? There's
yeah,
probably tons of hate speech on iMessage. There's tons of hate speech in private channels all over the place. You just don't see it. It's hard to find. So like out of sight, out of mind, for better or worse. Then there's like the Twitter thing, which because Elon bought it and has such a strong stance, has become kind of like a lightning rod for a bunch of these issues because like he's made such a stand about it. And then there's Reddit, right? Which is like in a lot of ways where a ton of crazy stuff is, but it is largely public and indexed, right? And so it's kind of always been this kind of really tough challenge. It has kind of Wikipedia-esque elements to it from the content moderation perspective, et cetera, but it has kind of been like a constant morass, right? In terms of, and we all know that like when you moderate, you make more money for all sorts of reasons, but the cost is the ethos of the internet and a lot of content.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I deeply love Reddit is they've done such a good job of riding that line, maybe more than anybody on the internet. They've enabled freedom of speech in a very narrow context where, you end up with these amazing niche communities. Like some of my favorite communities are actually the local ones, like the local communities for the county that we live in and like my hometown are better than Nextdoor, better than anything you can find on Facebook groups, etc. And they've just done such a good job at moderating that these places become really open and free conversations about topics you can't find anywhere else. And so that work has, I think, created the community that they have. And they have done quite a good job at getting rid of the very worst stuff. Like you don't run into the very, very, very most worst stuff that you do run into in like the other kind of terrible forums on the internet.
it's a good point, Sam, about the moderation of private groups. The Information had a story in the past week about Meta pulling its budget for fact checking within WhatsApp groups. So to understand this, you have to go way back, I think, post
I didn't even
Donald
know
Trump.
they did that.
Yeah. So in the era like around Trump and the heat they were getting around content moderation, Meta, like many other platforms, said, look, we're not in the fact checking business. But what they did, they actually struck agreements with news organizations to do some fact checking and then kind of report and publish their findings.
In what type of groups, though? Are we talking about large scale public groups or?
Yeah, this was also very confusing to me, Dave. And I think the short answer is yes, but also a little bit unclear. Regardless, they cut back a lot of that program. Which
I didn't even know WhatsApp had public groups.
Yeah, I'm very confused as to what that budget was going to.
Well, I think that's probably one of the reasons it was cut. And my guess is that it was a budget that was allocated for PR reasons and quickly became apparent that this wasn't a particularly effective way to really do anything, would be my guess. But
I'm sure it helped just like give the media companies some money. Like I think that's like another thing is like some of these you just have to figure out ways to credibly give, the New York Times some money.
I think it was it sat at the intersection of can we pay off the media companies to get off our back and can we look like we're combating misinformation more, and then probably accomplished absolutely nothing. But it raised the issue of moderation in private groups. And I think especially we're going to be entering another election cycle shortly, or we already are in an election cycle. And I think the theme of this one will I mean, the private groups is going to be, along with AI, probably a really big theme.
I hope not. I mean, the private group thing sucks. I mean, this is like a classic thing I always talk about is like if you give a mouse a cookie, product management, right?
Yeah.
Which is like under no circumstances should you be trying to moderate private groups. Like, that's a terrible idea, right?
I'm very
Like, I
troubled by
understand-
this.
What?
I'm very troubled by this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and I'm not saying the details I think are this, but this comes up all the time. It's like we need to moderate, or like we're gonna knock. Like Apple does this like thing where like they fingerprint, so like we're not looking at your iMessages, but we're fingerprinting things and then backing out what like is bad stuff or copyrighted stuff. This is a trail that ends in tears, right? If you think about, and it's really unfortunate that kind of this is getting chipped away at in various ways. Like to me, there's a huge problem with the internet broadly, which is we used to have this clear idea of what a public space was and a private space, right? And a public space was something that has certain rules associated with it and was kind of naturally checked in certain ways. But you could always go home or into the back of a bar and speak privately in confidence, right? Even I love the line they used to say, in Russia, even in Russia, you always had freedom of speech. You just might not have freedom after speech, right? And the problem with a lot of the moderation stuff, and people start messing around with how do we kind of control private groups, there's a lot of problems. Like private groups now can be infinitely large, but you really are encroaching on fundamental, like very basic human rights. So I'm very worried about, when you kind of open that up.
Dave, one more point, just like, I think the mechanism was that people had to flag things too. So I don't know if that, I agree. There are a lot of unanswered questions around this, but it was much more of like, you have to flag something and then it goes through this process. It wasn't there were lurkers. One more interesting story about a pre-IPO company. I don't know if you saw all the information's reporting about Klarna, but this is kind of crazy. Just to recap for folks, and as venture capitalist, I would love your take on how common this is. But basically, Klarna had Sequoia, one of their largest investor, one of their largest, had a board seat held by Mike Moritz. When Mike kind of stepped back from Sequoia, he stayed on the board, but Sequoia got another board seat. That board member tried to oust Moritz.
What?
Why?
Moritz.
This doesn't make any sense.
I saw the story. I didn't understand any of the motivation for it.
Yeah, because the person would have been put into, the person in the board seat, Moritz in this case, would have been put into a new board seat at the behest of the founder, I would imagine, right? Like the founder is usually the one that wants to continue to receive the advice from the person who's got the most institutional knowledge. And then the venture firm has the right to put somebody back into their seat. So I don't totally understand the.
Well, so what happened here is obviously Sequoia was not completely aligned with the founder and Mike, who was still on the board supporting the founder in an independent capacity. But in the end, he won. And Sequoia removed the guy who they had used to pressure him and put someone else in more conciliatory. So
someone just did some terrible political move here.
Yeah.
Like, someone screwed up.
Game of Thrones and you lose.
But it's like, why would you as a Sequoia partner try to cross Mike? Like that just seems like a terrible move.
Makes absolutely no sense. Yeah.
Well, the only reason they would have done it is if they were genuinely, what does Sequoia want to do? It wants to protect its economic interest. And Sequoia and other VCs have been.
How many seats are on this board?
I think you guys are overthinking it a little bit, right?
I just think it's like, the Sequoia partner has some serious balls, is like what it comes down to. Like.
Okay, so first of all, the Sequoia partner that attempted the coup was obviously acting on behalf of Sequoia, not independently. So I think the interesting thing here, yes, because if you look at what happened, Sequoia and Roloff, who runs Sequoia, then sort of returned with their tail between their legs a little bit and publicly apologized for this and said they now support the CEO and are ready to move forward. But let me explain why I think this is important before you all butt in again. We see all the time, Travis getting ousted because of Benchmark, right?
That was a very different situation.
No, I'm just giving you examples. We see all the time, though, and they're different circumstances, right? Apoorva getting pushed out of Instacart, right? Sequoia, I believe, was involved in that. And I think it's interesting just to see a failed one of these. And I think it is a reminder that, especially at this moment where you have all these companies, these late stage private companies that aren't seeing the exits that their investors expected, there are a lot of divisions at the top and at the board and between the founders and the largest investors around what happens next. And so I think the interesting thing about this, yes, it's kind of funny because it's a failed coup. And yes, it's kind of funny because the coup kind of went after the king, one of the most legendary investors in Silicon Valley. But I think it illustrates a much broader point, which is that there's a lot of divisions in the sort of strategy for these companies. And we're going to see this play out. And I think we are going to see, maybe whether it's at ByteDance, worth $1 bazillion, right? All the way, to all these late stage companies. And I think there's going to be more to come. There's probably going to be more pressure on CEOs. There are going to be more investors kind of saber rattling. And I think that's something to watch for.
I agree with what you're saying, Jess. And I want to point out that a lot of my banker friends are suggesting that anyone trying to get out to IPO is basically going to have to do it by early to mid-June because the summer's a dead period. And after that, it's like all on election cycle. And that could create all kinds of tumultuous things in the market. We don't know. It's unexpected. And so I really think that early March to early June, a lot of stuff is going to happen with all of these late stage pre-IPO companies. To your point, board changes, a lot of drama, bureaucracy. Are they going to IPO? Aren't they going to IPO? And we're going to see, I think, in a very short period of time for this extended 2024 cycle, a bunch of companies taking a stab at it within 3 months or so.
I think bankers want there to be this flood, Brett, but I think the founders are like, I just don't know. I mean, people don't seem in a super rush, but then again, you've got things like clearly you have investors angling. So I think it, like last year, which turned out to be really hard to predict. Like I think one of our first episodes was about, whether Instacart was going to open the IPO floodgates.
And it's still below its IPO price. And the answer is no,
below its
as we obviously said at the time. Like there's no change. The biggest tech companies are ripping, which is great because people will feel richer and they'll invest in more stuff in the very abstract. But like only marginal companies will go public in the next several months, and only if they have to. And Reddit might be one of those marginal companies, and maybe Klarna is. And it's still hilarious. I totally understand going after the CEO, but going after Mike Moritz as your own firm is crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Like the whole thing doesn't make sense.
But look, there's no excitement. These companies aren't exciting, right? These companies are
Well, and Sam, I think they also stopped growing, or their growth slowed substantially, right? And when the growth slows and the runway starts to shorten, and whether you need to raise your next round or you need to go public to raise that capital, people start to disagree about what the strategy should be going forward, right? And that's where you end up with these things.
It's the age-old thing in all things, which is growth forgives all sins. Right?
Yeah.
Even the most messed up thing in the world, but if it's growing really quickly, you're going to get what you want out of it. But when you start getting into business, these are companies, right? And there's a lot of companies in the world. And, that's just not how you sell high-flying IPOs that kind of generate real momentum.
Yeah. And Jess, your point about the founders on the founder side being removed, that usually comes because the growth rate of the founder is not keeping up with the growth rate of the company. And so they're falling behind in their ability to lead the company and to make strategy changes that need to be made. And that's usually when you see the board take a move that ends up parting ways with the founder, or there's some other grand coup going on. But like the coup on the board member side is like very strange. I'm going to just continue to say that.
Guys, I would be remiss not to talk about the other failed coup, which is the OpenAI. I mean, it's sort of like they went after the dude and they lost. And I don't know. I'm still waiting for this new board. TikTok. No one seems to. I don't know what's happening.
The Zero Dark 30 thing was it's been 500 days since the OpenAI.
Ooh. Yeah, just put that on the front page of the information. We all
just
need
have
to
a
know.
ticker at the very top that's counting every day.
You know what we could do? We could start gambling on it. How many days until OpenAI has a new board member?
Ooh, I wonder if the Apple Sports app would be willing to put the odds.
Yes. Well, Dave, that was actually my next. We got two more topics. I wanted to talk about the sports app. I also want to talk about the latest in the TikTok China US imbroglio. But let's talk sports. So Apple unveiled a new sports app for the iPhone. I would love to hear from you guys why you think they're doing this. And then I will nitpick with the sports covered in this app, but we can get to that second.
Well, I think there's a very practical reason, which it's quite hard to get your phone to give you the scores in real time for every sport that you're interested in. Some of them are better than others. Like basketball has been very well integrated. The NFL has not. It's like quite hard actually to get your home screen to give you live updates all the time. Whereas with the NBA, it's like perfect. It works every single time. And there's some third-party apps that do this, but getting access to these data feeds is a non-trivial business development task that requires real muscle. And so I kind of view this as twofold. One, they're just delivering utility to iPhone users, which is something that everybody wants. Like everybody who pays attention to their favorite teams wants to be able to get the scores on their home screen. And so they're just like making that like extremely good and easy. I think on the other side, we've talked about it a lot on the pod. There's a lot going on in sports and sports media rights, and what's going on that side of the house is a very real thing. I think that with the Hollywood strike and how this year has played out, I mean, look, the Super Bowl was the most watched live event since the moon landing, right? So it's become super clear that sports is, if not the most powerful media medium currently out there, it's definitely one of the top most important. And so I think they're probably angling to have this interplay with their media distribution through Apple TV and things like that, and that it becomes a really powerful distribution mechanism.
It does make me wonder, though, if the moon landing in the 1969 was more viewership and a smaller base, it seems like just for the ad dollars, we should go back to the moon.
Or SpaceX should become a media company.
Yeah, just sell ads.
I mean, it's got satellite. Guys, maybe this is his plan. This is the Starlink business model.
What we need is Taylor Swift to date an astronaut. And then we can really drive those ad dollars to the moon landing.
But I think that, like, when I saw this, I was like, oh, they're angling for like the NBA streaming rights or something, which are currently being up for grabs and very hotly contested, and all the tech companies are angling
and all the apps. Like I think there's so many apps in the App Store that make a lot of money, in sports. If I were one of these founders of these companies and I just see Apple is now launching a free, probably going to be default app on the iPhone, I'm sure it's going to be integrated into Vision Pro at some point. Like I think I'm like, shit. Like this is going to be a lot harder now. Apple's going to take sports seriously, and I think they're going to use it across many devices.
The other interesting thing that I thought was very interesting is that I always say the devil is in the defaults. And when you look at the next NBA, so the Warriors versus the Lakers, and you click on it, the top of the screen is the betting odds, which I think is really interesting. And I'm not actually totally sure how to interpret that. I know that Twitter recently announced they're going to start putting the betting odds embedded into tweets. I don't even, whatever they're calling themselves, X. But it's interesting that betting odds are showing up here. I also saw an article yesterday that gambling had its largest month in history in the United States last month. Yeah. So there's also
the
something
Super Bowl
going on there. No, I think it's just that it's becoming so embedded into all these digital
Do you guys
formats.
gamble?
No, you can't in California.
But like, do you know anyone that actually gambles?
I do. Well, we have a friend that was at our Super Bowl party who had driven across the state line to Nevada to place a bunch of bets, and then was at Tahoe and came back.
I totally understand that there's a lot of gambling. Don't get me wrong. Look, I get it. In my head, the customer is reasonably poor, right? And it's like this, et cetera.
I don't think so. I think it's like a hobby.
Yeah, I think that's very different from sports. I think that sports betting is like this new, it's like a new, and I don't even know, it's like a new form of fantasy football is enormous, fantasy sports are enormous, and it's just a big extension of that. It's just another action you can take to show your fandom.
Okay, pop quiz. What is the most frequently betted upon sport? So not like biggest dollars at play, but like if you wanted to place a bet in a random time, like you could.
I know the answer, so I won't answer.
Most frequently betted upon?
I would guess soccer because it's the biggest sport.
Okay, that's your guess. Dave, what's your guess?
Who has the most games? That's what I'm
Right,
thinking through. Like,
is it something weird like cricket?
Who has the most frequent games? I don't actually know.
You know what it is? It's Flip Cup.
Flip Cup. It is tennis.
Interesting.
Whoa.
Because there are just always matches being played all around the world, and there are a lot of different parts that you can bet on.
Look, long tennis. This thesis is then long tennis channel and long tennis rights, which no one cares about. We could afford those. Like,
that's our.
Let's get some
plan.
tennis rights.
Like, we should just buy the tennis
coming
rights.
soon. The more or less tennis cast.
Guys, I just such a great sport. Can we? Who's excited for Indian Wells? Who's excited?
There's a big tennis movie coming out actually with Zendaya. I saw it. Looks pretty good.
It looks weird. Britt, I know you have to leave, but maybe.
What? Oh, should I just tell you about PCC?
Well, you can do one, but Sam and I actually have one. So if you had to leave,
you guys should go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
The only reason I have to leave is because 2 of the 4 of us were late. The audience can guess which 2 were late. And I am rightfully going to serve a founder on a call that I promised them I would get on right now. But the rest of this crew is...
For the money, just delay. Fine.
Do your day job.
I'm such a bad venture capitalist. I
And
start my meetings on time.
Skip PCC. I will not make that mistake. So
there's so much more good stuff to come.
I'm doing something important. Can I call you in 10? I'm sorry. I'm with the founder. I'm sorry. I can't quite hang up on this person.
I'm recruiting.
We should do a punch list of all the VC excuses that they give founders, so founders know how to read between the lines. Except we'd be
phone died. Be there in a sec. AKA,
right,
I'm skiing and I'll be there in 20.
Carry on, my friends.
American Fiction is the best movie I've seen in years. Don't you agree, Jess?
Absolutely. It's a great movie. We went to a theater to see it. Sam, say more without giving it away.
There's a line from Space Ghost where Space Ghost says, I believe everything that man just said because it's exactly what I want to hear. And this movie is just the best because it's hilarious and exactly my politics.
Who's in this movie?
I'm heartened by it because for all of you non-wokes out there, this movie is this shining beacon that perhaps with Hollywood at the tip of the spear, we are moving beyond this into a more a new era.
I like this.
We can all believe the right things.
Jeffrey Wright stars. I love how we think we're discovering this movie. It is highly nominated for numerous Academy Awards and broadly recognized. So this is not a cult under the radar reco, but it was funny, it was intelligent, it was surprising, beautifully acted, and well worth in this lead up to the Oscars in 2-3 weeks, if that.
No one cares in the Oscars. It's a completely irrelevant event.
This is Pop Culture Corner. We can.
Yeah, the other interesting Pop Culture Corner thing is that Beyonce launched a country song and has become, number 1 on the country charts, and it's causing much consternation in the music world. But
it's kind of like Elon Musk buying Twitter. It's like stay in your goddamn lane.
Yeah, people are very
Dave,
upset.
can you explain why people are upset? I mean, Taylor went from country to pop. Why can't you cross over here?
I think it's the same old WWF stuff, right? Like Beyonce is supposed to be a pop star. What's she doing in country? Interestingly, the largest country star in the world, Lainey Wilson, who just won everything at the CMAs, she was spotted at a recent awards show with Jack Antonoff, who is Taylor Swift's main producer. So Britt and I were theorizing yesterday that the producers in the back channels must have known that Beyonce is going to do this. And so now they're all trying to get into the country game, which I think is actually the main thing that's happening. Post Malone is also doing a country album right now and or collaborating with a bunch of country artists. So there's a whole lot of country crossover going on.
Is this because there's no room in pop?
No, what does it say about the election?
I think that country is the new rock and roll. And we kind of lost rock and roll. There's no real rock, genre anymore. And so I think that people go to country because that's where the guitar continues to exist. And I don't know, that's kind of my esoteric theory of it.
Is it that, or is it like Jamie Dimon when he's just being a Trump apologist and these guys trying to say we've gone too far in one direction culturally and we want to serve the other half of America?
He would
maybe
dispute that he is a Trump apologist for what it's worth.
Yeah, that seemed like it was taken out of context.
Was it?
Yeah. No, this is a good. Also, I don't believe I'm asking you two gents this question, but do you think there'd be an uproar if Beyonce was a man?
Yeah. Probably. I think
Beyonce wouldn't be as popular if she was a man. So.
Okay, but that's answering a different question. But
I think so, Jess, because let's say Drake went and did a country album. I think people would be pretty nonplussed about it. I think they
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Knows?
It's hard to
Who
say.
Who can say? Okay, what else? Anything else catching your eye this week? We've managed. Maybe we can save our. I did promise I kind of stated a state of AI on the outset. I guess we can. We've seen a couple exciting things. Sora, is that what it's called? My brain's so fried.
Sora. Although nobody's really seen it. Yeah, there's been
Correct.
demos of it, which is an interesting.
Yeah, that's always interesting.
I guess it's good that they're keeping it safe from the election, I would imagine.
No, that's just marketing. Don't play into that, please, Dave.
I'm just
marketing. They just don't have. It's either
that.
It's too expensive. It's probably too expensive.
Yeah, it's way too expensive.
And but I will say this: in credit to OpenAI, I think the thing that OpenAI is best in the world at right now is not AI; it's marketing. Their marketing is unbelievable. Right.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And they've consistently crushed it on this.
It's so good.
First the Sam Altman, this is too dangerous and scary. I'm going to be before Congress. Incredible marketing. And now this, I have to say that their launch strategy for it is incredibly sophisticated, right? Where they basically started on Twitter. They did this kind of community-driven Q&A thing, give it to influencers. It's really sophisticated marketing. And I really put my hats off to them. I'm not so super fan of most of what that company does. And I think it's pretty disingenuous, but they are great at marketing. They're the best marketers.
If anything, it's a great reminder that building startups and building companies takes great marketing. And there's I think there's this thing in Silicon Valley where you have to pretend like you aren't a marketer or that marketing isn't something that you do. And you're just going to build a product and people are going to find it. But any of us working in the grind every day know that you have to find customers and you've got to stand out and you've got to do good marketing. And if anything, when I started my career at Apple, Steve used to pound the table that the marketers and the engineers would sit in the same room and would be on this equal footing. And, here you have the most valuable startup in the world and the number one company in the world. They're great at marketing. And so be good at marketing, people.
I'd say that the reason for that, Dave, is this kind of idea that the product itself should sell itself. And the product is so good, right, that it doesn't need. And the reality is you have two incredible examples of that in history. Google and Facebook, right? Where the products inherently were, in case of Google, was just so good, right, that it marketed itself. And then in the case of Facebook, it invented really at scale, meaningful viral marketing where it was just a peer-to-peer. It was incredible, right? And so I think
we still did a lot of work though, Sam. I think you can give Facebook and Google, frankly, great marketing chops.
A ton of work. But the narrative became that these things are just so good, they propel themselves, right? And so you want to
What was the great marketing that early Google and early Facebook did?
I mean, I think that Google, just think about, when you think about Google, what do you think about? You think about this engineering culture, this fun place to work, the colorful colors, the incredibly fast search, the integration with everything. They did all these incredible distribution deals with web browsers, with Apple. with, I think
They
Microsoft.
did right. They did next level distribution deals. They did great press
marketing
too, right? You could see the bouncy balls on the.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that Google really did early on that was the best marketing of all was having a web page that loaded really fast. Like that was the marketing, because the reality is everyone was like, remember that era was like, is my computer on the internet? Like, I don't know if the internet is working. And so what did you do? You went to Google. Why? Because it was the smallest web page, right? That's it, right? Like that, the marketing, the brilliance of Google's launch wasn't even about the search being better. It was literally just that the page had so little data on it and loaded so fast that and it was always reliably online, right?
Yeah.
And so when you were like, I'm literally at home and I don't have a phone, so I'm like trying to get my Ethernet connect. I'm trying to get my my dual tied ISDN to work, right? And I'm not sure if it's connected to the internet, and I don't have a phone to check a second way, so I'm just banging on it. You always load to Google first, right? And because of that, it became the thing your fingers did, which is you always went to Google first, right? And then once your fingers were at Google, you just use their search engine.
Yeah, that's a different kind of marketing. But then what OpenAI is doing now, which really, I think it's very clever. It also starts, with the Sam Altman tweet thread, which also remind me of what Meta's doing with Mark doing.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact
Vision
same
Pro
thing.
to Oculus. So I think there are, and in some ways, what Elon does.
Elon, yeah, 100%. There's no question that it's easier to market people and individual voices and cult leaders than it is to market companies or products, right? And so I think...
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
I've been doing a lot of work on this Harvard stuff, right? And it's a really interesting thing where there's 1,000 organizations that have different spins on Harvard alumni for this and Harvard alumni for that, and and they all have agendas and plans, and they're really hard to see through, because it's just really hard to associate anything with them or trust. I mean, again, some of them are really high quality, have great missions, but they're complicated, right? Companies are complicated. Whereas I'm this is the Sam Altman company. This is the Elon Musk company. It's so much easier to market through a person, right? And that, by the way, again, to plug ourselves for once, the Slow Ventures, I'll plug the fact that that's why we've been pioneering this investing directly in people thing. We've been spending now for the last several years building this practice where we're, I think, one of the only venture firms, the only ones that will literally write an equity check, not into a C Corp, right, but effectively into a holding company that represents an individual influencer in a niche and in a vertical. And so we're funding them as individuals. The products and the companies they build on top are what they build on top. That is how you monetize them. But fundamentally, it's actually about the cult leader, right, and the individual that stands first as the brand. And that's what you're building first. And so we're very aligned with this mentality around how you build communities and market.
Oh, the deep irony that you're marketing an individual to build an AI company.
Well, also, I think at the extremes, not at what you're doing, Sam, it's slow, but I think on the level of Elon, it also kind of makes clear or sets the precedent that the person is greater than the company in some way. Well,
they are. They are. I think that's the thing. That's the point, is that the companies are products, right? The companies...
Yeah.
Is it just about the humanity? I mean, if Britt were here, she would also be talking about the reason she named her company Brit & Co. was because she researched all of the women, basically companies that make products for women are almost always named after women. And so there's something about building trust with a person that enables trust for the product. And that could also be it. It's until you can truly trust a company, Steve Jobs always used to talk about that brands are like bank accounts, and that as brands build trust, you choose to spend that trust in different ways. And early on, if you're a startup, it's very hard to have trust, right? And so the only way to really build trust is to build trust between a person and the audience, right? And then that might transfer by proxy into a company and a product that delivers over and over again.
Well, and that's how startups work in anyway, is people trust not the company because it doesn't exist, the entrepreneur first, right? And so if the entrepreneur happens to have built a community and the trust of thousands or millions of people, and that in a community, that's incredibly valuable. I actually think it's the ultimate CAC hack. This is kind of fundamentals of what we do at Slow in this practice, right? And so I think it's critical. I also think, for what it's worth, it does connect to this Beyonce question, because if you think about it, someone builds an enormous brand, right? I was joking about the connection to Elon, but you build an enormous brand, you build an enormous reach doing something, right? And it's cool if it's native to that community. If you start effectively using that as a hammer to enter other verticals with just sheer will, not because you earned it, not because you are a country star, but just by sheerly forcing your way in with your kind of scaled trust and brand and cult, I think people wig out about that a little bit, right? And I think
That's a really good
partially-
point. That's actually, you're absolutely right. That's definitely the answer. Now that I think about reading some of the comments about Beyonce doing that, it really does come down to, hey, you weren't in this community. You weren't around, and you didn't develop the social relationships in this community. You weren't, part of it. Why are you here all of a sudden? Like that's
and you can't, at a certain scale, you can come over the top and force it. But to your point about building equity versus spending equity, I think like when you do a translation like that, you're spending equity, right? Or like in as you do it, right? You can do it, right? But there's a cost to it.
It's a great point.
I would be, again, I must point out, we named a podcast after ourselves. Just
well, that's because podcasting, you have to do this, right?
You
All
have
you're
to
doing.
Trust us. The mores, or you can pick. You don't have to trust both sides, but you got to pick one or the other.
And we're even getting, and Jess, we're even, to your point at the beginning of the pod, we're even getting feedback that, you guys need to do better character development, right? Like we need to understand the names of the characters, right? Et cetera. So.
The problem is you characters just defy description. So that's just, you had simple jobs.
Well, and that's why, for instance, I would argue Dave and I have very broad audiences and pockets of relationships in lots of places, but we're not like double down on anything, right? And that's probably, if we were being totally draconian brand builders, is a terrible strategy, right? Like what you'd want to do is like pick a lane and own it. And like, I think what we do is not that. That creates really interesting conversations and really interesting intersections, but it is the opposite of a Taylor Swift study, right? In how to like own a community, right? Like I wouldn't, it's slow ventures. I would not invest in Sam Lesson because I don't own any vertical, right? Or have the trust of a single community. I just have like a smattering of people who for some reason like are willing to talk to me.
Fair enough.
Okay. I think you're pretty good at community building, but I see your point. Okay, folks, I think let's thank our viewers and listeners for sticking with us. We covered some good ground here. So fun times. Thank you again to everyone. We appreciate the comments, the sharing, and our back channel for keeping us on our toes with all the latest and greatest. So with that, I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you here back next week for another episode of More or Less. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed this show, please leave us a virtual high five by rating it and reviewing it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Find more information about each episode in the show notes and follow us on social media by searching for @MoreOrLess, @DaveMorin, @Lesson, @JLesson, and as for me, I'm @Brit. See you guys next time.